Some movies you watch, and then some movies you somehow remember. The Sandlot feels like one of those films. Even if your childhood looked nothing like this one, it still reaches for something familiar. The heat of summer, the feeling of a neighborhood that somehow seemed like its own world. The unspoken hope that if you could just find your place inside it, maybe everything would start to make sense. On the surface, it is a baseball movie. But like so many great childhood films, it's really about belonging. Released in 1993, but set in the summer of 1962, The Sandlot plays like a memory of an America that already felt nostalgic by the time the movie was made. This is part of the magic. It's not only looking back at a childhood, it's looking back at the idea of childhood. Dirt fields, pickup games, tree houses, neighborhood legends. Long afternoons that felt like the day could stretch on forever. The film understands that when you're young, the world is small in size, but enormous in feeling. One fence can feel haunted. One older kid can feel like a hero, and one summer can feel like your whole life. What makes The Sandlot endure is how effortlessly it captures that scale. It never treats childhood like something silly or small. It treats it like mythology. The fears are bigger. The laughs are louder. The embarrassment feels permanent. The friendships feel unbreakable. And because the movie takes those feelings seriously, it earns something rare. It becomes more than a family comedy or sports movie. It becomes one of the films that people carry with them. That is why The Sandlot still matters. Not because it reminds us of baseball, but because it reminds us what it felt like to be young enough for one ordinary summer to become a legend in your mind. The Sandlot begins the way a lot of childhood memories begin, with a move, a silence, and the feeling that everybody else already understands the world way better than you do. Scotty Smalls is dropped into a new neighborhood, a new house, new rhythm, and almost immediately the movie locks into something deeper than a sports setup. He's not trying to win a championship, he's trying to find a way in. And that simple notion is why the film works. Before The Sandlot is about baseball, it's about that nervous, lonely feeling of watching life happen just outside your window and wondering if there's any place for you in it. The movie handles that fear with a lot more tenderness than people sometimes give it credit for. Smalls is awkward, unsure of himself, and completely disconnected from the language of baseball, which in this world feels almost like a language of boyhood itself. His stepfather Bill tries to reach him through the game, and those scenes matter because they quietly establish what Smalls is already chasing. He's not just trying to learn how to throw or catch, he's trying to become the kind of kid who belongs somewhere. The glove, the cap, the stories about legends of the game, all of it feels less like equipment and more like an initiation he is not sure he can survive. And then, Benny Rodriguez enters the movie like the answer to a problem Smalls cannot yet explain. Benny is cool without seeming cruel, talented without showing off too much, and confident in the effortless way only childhood heroes seem to be. He's not just the best player on the field, he's the bridge into the entire world of the film. One of the smartest behind-the-scenes choices director David Mickey Evans made was helping the friendship between Smalls and Benny feel natural instead of rushed. There's a lived-in ease to the way Benny brings him into the group, and that ease becomes the emotional foundation for everything that follows. You believe Smalls would follow this kid anywhere, because the movie makes Benny feel less like a plot device and more like the first person to truly see him. That is really the beginning of The Sandlot. Not the first game, not the first joke, not even the first insult. It all begins with recognition, with one kid standing on the outside of a summer and another reaching back to pull him in. Once Smalls is brought into the group, The Sandlot stops feeling like a movie about one kid and starts feeling like a movie about a world. And that world is what makes this film feel so timeless. The dusty field, the uneven bases, the treehouse lookout, the fence looming over left field with something mythic behind it. None of it is polished, and that's exactly why it feels real. This is not baseball as spectacle. It's baseball as a summer ritual, a daily meeting place, a kingdom built out of dirt, sweat, noise, and repetition. And this is where the movie really finds its soul. It understands that childhood friendship is not usually formed through one grand moment. It is formed through showing up again and again, through being teased until you know that teasing means you're in. The boys in The Sandlot feel memorable not because the movie over-explains them, but because it lets them exist like kids remembered through time, slightly exaggerated, larger than life, and permanently frozen at the exact age when personality feels loudest. And this is where The Sandlot begins to build one of its smartest ideas, that children turn ordinary spaces into legend simply by living in them long enough. The field is not just where they play, it's where identities are made. Benny is the hero, Ham is the loudmouth. Squints is the operator. Yeah, Bertram, Timmy, and Tommy. They all feel like the kind of names and personalities that would stick in your mind forever, the way childhood friends often do. The movie does not need to give each of them a dramatic arc. It just needs to make them feel like they complete this little universe, and they do. There is also a looseness to the scenes that make them feel like they're almost found instead of written. That is part of why the movie's humor still lands. The insults feel improvised, even when they're carefully placed. The chatter overlaps. The game feels like they've been going on long before the camera arrived. That easy chemistry is one of the reasons The Sandlot still feels more lived in than many much bigger coming-of-age films. For Smalls, this is the point where survival becomes belonging. And for the audience, this is the point where The Sandlot starts to feel like home. Every great childhood movie reaches the point where the ordinary starts turning into legend, and The Sandlot does that better than almost any film of its era. Up to this point, the movie has been about building a world. Here, it starts to build mythology. The fence beyond the outfield stops feeling like a property line and starts feeling like a border between safety and danger. The stories get bigger, the warnings get louder. The imaginations of these boys take something real and transform it into something enormous. That is one of the film's greatest strengths. It understands that childhood is full of exaggeration, but that exaggeration is never faked to the people living inside of it. The Beast is one of the best examples of that in any coming-of-age movie. Before we ever really know what is behind that fence, the boys have already built him into folklore. He is not just dangerous, he is impossible. He is a creature big enough to swallow baseballs, haunt conversations, and define the edge of the entire neighborhood. The film treats that fear exactly the way childhood treats fear. Seriously. That is why it works. It does not wink at the audience and say, look how silly these kids are. It lets us remember what it felt like when one yard, one rumor, or one shadow could feel like the biggest threat in the world. And right in the middle of that mythology, the movie gives us one of the most unforgettable side roads. The pool, the summer heat, and Wendy Peppercorn. In another movie, this might just be a throwaway comedic scene. But The Sandlot understands that Wendy represents the emotional language of childhood. She is a symbol of that first overwhelming, embarrassing, impossible kind of crush. Marley Shelton plays her with the exact right balance of warmth and larger-than-life glow. And the scene works because the movie understands that childhood embarrassment and longing are often funny and painful at the same time. That balance is what makes this part of The Sandlot so memorable. If The Sandlot has a sequence that feels like pure summer turned into cinema, it is the 4th of July game. There are bigger scenes in the movie in terms of plot, louder scenes in terms of comedy, and more famous scenes in terms of quotes. But this is the moment where the film becomes something more than just a coming-of-age story. It becomes iconic. The boys keep playing as fireworks explode above them, the night sky filling with light, while Ray Charles sings America the Beautiful. And for a few minutes, the movie stops feeling like a comedy and starts drifting like a memory. It is one of the most beautiful passages in any 1990s family film because it captures a feeling that is hard to explain, but instantly recognizable. The sense that when you're young, certain nights feel so perfect, you do not realize until years later that you are standing inside of a moment you would remember forever. What makes that scene so powerful is how little it has to do with winning or losing. Nobody is chasing a trophy. Nobody is proving anything. The game matters because the moment matters. Baseball becomes less of a sport and more of a rhythm, something woven into the air of the neighborhood itself. The glow of the fireworks, the dust rising under their feet, the silhouettes of the boys against the sky. It all turns The Sandlot into sacred ground for a few minutes. This is where the movie's nostalgia becomes almost overwhelming, because it is no longer telling us about summer. It's recreating the feeling of believing that summer might last forever. And then, like childhood always does, the movie pivots from awe to chaos. The carnival sequence is the perfect opposite side of that same summer coin. If the fireworks scene is wonder, the carnival ride is reckless joy pushed to the edge of disaster. The boys cram themselves full of chewing tobacco, and what follows is one of the movie's most unforgettable comic set pieces. Gross, ridiculous, and completely in tune with the way kids turn bad ideas into legendary stories. What gives The Sandlot its staying power is that it does not let all of the wonder stay untouched. Eventually, every great childhood story has to move from mythology toward truth. The ball goes over the fence. The legend of the beast stops being just a story the boys tell each other and becomes a real obstacle standing between them and disaster. Suddenly, the movie starts balancing two versions of childhood at once: the one where imagination makes everything bigger, and the one where growing up means realizing the world is usually stranger, funnier, and more human than the stories you told about it. That is such an important turn in the film. Up till now, the boys have lived inside a rumor. The beast has been built out of fear, exaggeration, and the kind of neighborhood mythology kids create when they do not have the full picture. He is less a dog than a monster guarding the edge of their world. But the Sandlot is smart enough to know that childhood is not only about believing in myths, it is also about the moment those myths begin to fall apart. Not in a cruel way, in a clarifying way. The things that once looked enormous begin to shrink just enough for you to understand them. That is why the film's back half feels more emotional than sometimes people remember. Smalls is no longer trying to just fit in. He's trying to make something right. The signed ball is not simply a plot device. It represents his connection to Bill, the stepfather he's been struggling to reach all summer. The panic, the guilt, the frantic attempts to fix things before an adult finds out. All of that feels so true to childhood because it's not really about the object itself. It's about disappointing someone whose approval suddenly matters more than you know how to admit. And the boys' ridiculous rescue plans only make that feeling more believable. Every impossible contraption, every failed attempt, every burst of confidence followed by disaster feels exactly like the logic of being young. You think one more idea can solve everything. You think chaos can still be reversed if you move fast enough. And in the middle of all of that, the Sandlot begins quietly preparing for its real emotional turn. The understanding that monsters are not always monsters, summers are not endless, and growing up often begins the moment the story changes shape. By the time the Sandlot reaches its ending, it understands something a lot of nostalgic movies are afraid to say out loud. The most beautiful parts of childhood are often beautiful because they do not last. The adventure with the beast gets resolved. The fear finally gives way to truth, and the boys get their story. The kind of story that will follow them for the rest of their lives. But the real ending of The Sandlot is not about whether the ball is being recovered. It's about the fact that this summer, like all summers, is already slipping into memory. That is what gives the film its ache. The neighborhood that once felt enormous begins to shrink. The legends that felt terrifying become knowable. The days that seemed endless reveal themselves as numbered. And the boys who looked inseparable start to take on that faint, bittersweet slow that only memory can give people. The movie does not dramatize growing apart in some huge tragic way. It does something quieter and much more honest. It lets adulthood arrive in hindsight. It lets the narrator tell us what happened to everyone. And in doing so, it makes this crazy summer feel tender. The closing narration is one of the reasons The Sandlot still lands so hard emotionally. It's not just giving us updates. It's showing us how childhood lives on in fragments, in jokes, in nicknames, in stories that get told over and over until they stop sounding like ordinary days and start sounding like folklore. Benny becoming a real player, Smalls finding his own place in the game, the others drifting into separate lives, waiting for them beyond the neighborhood. All of it feels exactly right because the film understands that the real sadness of growing up is not always loss. Sometimes it's simply distance. Time doing what time always does. And then there's that final image of connection that remains. Smalls and Benny, older now, still linked by the thing that brought them together in the first place. Baseball gave the movie its shape, but friendship gave it its soul. This is why the ending works so beautifully. The Sandlot is not mourning childhood. It's honoring it. Not because it lasted, but because it mattered. The reason The Sandlot has lasted is because it never really belonged to just one generation. It was made in the early 1990s, set in the early 1960s, and somehow it's continued to feel personal to people who grew up decades after either one. That's a hard thing for any movie to do. Most nostalgic films are tied tightly to the era they were remembering or the era that first embraced them. The Sandlot somehow still lives in both. It remembers an older America of neighborhood baseball and long summer days, but it also became a defining memory for kids who found it on VHS, on cable, on repeat viewings after school, and eventually through streaming. It's a movie about memory that became one. Part of that legacy comes from how quotable and instantly recognizable it is, but the deeper reason is emotional. The Sandlot does not survive because people remember the jokes alone. It survives because it remembers childhood in a way that feels true. It remembers how friends become mythic in your mind, how one neighborhood can feel like an entire world, how embarrassment can feel fatal, Fear can feel supernatural, and one perfect summer night can stay lit inside you long after you've forgotten 100 other things. The 4th of July game, the pool, the carnival ride, the chase, the ending. None of these moments work just because they're iconic. They work because they're connected to feelings that don't really age out. And that's why it lasts. Not because it's a baseball classic, but because it's a time machine. Maybe this is why The Sandlot still feels so powerful all these years later. Not because it tells the biggest story, or the loudest one, or even the most dramatic one. It feels powerful because it understands something small and true, that childhood is often made up of ordinary days that only become extraordinary later. A dusty field, a fence at the edge of the neighborhood, a group of kids who at the time probably felt like they would always be there. The movie knows that when you're young, you don't realize you're living inside nostalgia. You just think you're playing ball, riding rides, laughing too hard, chasing something over a fence, or trying to survive the embarrassment of being seen. Only later do these moments start glowing. That is what The Sandlot has always captured so beautifully. It's not really asking us to miss the past in some broad, sentimental way. It's asking us to remember the scale of childhood feeling, how big one summer could be, how legendary one story could become, how one friend reaching out to you at the right moment could change the shape of your world. And because the film understands that so well, it becomes more than a baseball movie and more than a coming-of-age comedy. It becomes a way of remembering how life once felt before time sped up. And maybe that's the quiet gift of The Sandlot. It reminds us that the moments we carry forever are not always the ones that looked important at the time. Sometimes they're just the days we thought would never end.